Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. 2026 is here, but the questions remain. Most people expect Mercedes to be the dominant engine supplier of the upcoming season, but which manufacturer will be closest as their challengers this year? Big talk today about Honda and how competitive Aston Martin are set to be, but Ferrari, here we go again. Lots of noise coming out of that Ferrari camp on the positive that maybe this year is finally going to be their year. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Welcome to 2026. This graphic coming out of Haas today, we'll get a little bit more into Haas in a second, but there have been 25 days elapsed since the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix where Lando Norris was crowned world champion. In 25 days time, pre-season testing gets underway in Barcelona. So 3 pre-season tests, if you guys are unfamiliar. I'll actually just quickly share for you guys the calendar of the season, just as a reminder with the year getting underway. But in a few weeks, 3 weeks, we go to pre-season testing in Barcelona. That is behind closed doors, and it's a 5-day test, but the teams are only able to use 3 of those days to actually test on. Probably on at least 2 of those days, the weather won't be ideal, right? So that's kind of the reason why, given that time of year in January in Barcelona. It's also why we tend to do these tests nowadays in Bahrain, where weather is less of a concern. And we will go to Bahrain a couple of weeks after for the second test. That will be publicized. The third one is also a couple of weeks after that. That will also be broadcast. Then we go to Melbourne between the 6th and the 8th of March for the first round of the season. China, Japan, Bahrain, Saudi, Miami, very similar start to the season as we had last year. Then we run through Belgium, which is the 12th race of the season. Then we go to Hungary. The summer break happens after 13 rounds. Then it's the Netherlands for the final ever Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort, at least for the time being. Their contract is over. Monza, Madrid is right at the end of the European stints because they've got to finish the track in time. Then we go to Baku, Singapore, and a very similar closing out of the season as we had this time round. So that is the calendar. If you guys are unfamiliar, let's talk about Haas. This is officially Toyota Gazoo Racing Haas F1 team. So they've rebranded. MoneyGram is gone. This is the new logo, right? So we know that that partnership with Toyota is becoming increasingly tight, shall we say. There have been some conversations as to whether Toyota might decide at some point in the next couple of years, you know what, Gene, we just want to buy you out and we want to make this the Toyota Formula 1 team as we have seen in the past. Not sure that's going to happen, but this feels like it could be a step towards it. Toyota Gazoo Racing becoming the official title sponsor and getting ever more heavily involved with this Haas Formula 1 project. We also have, well, this is their actual picture. They call themselves America's Formula 1 team, but, you know, Toyota Gazoo Racing in the header, Toyota Gazoo Racing in the bio, in the picture, and all that stuff. So, yes, changes happening behind the scenes. McLaren, they are now officially McLaren MasterCard Formula 1 team. Is it pretty? No, but it is what it is. Pretty sure every team now has a title sponsor. It is also now the case with Williams, with Atlassian or whatever they're called. I think McLaren were effectively the last bastion in that sense, but now they've got the MasterCard sponsor. The same applies with Mercedes. Now, Mercedes' old logo was here at the bottom, and this is their new one, and it's caused quite a bit of drama today because this logo at the bottom, it has a bit of character, right? This is the silver arrows as we tend to perceive them. This is what I think of when I think of the Mercedes logo. A little bit of artistry, a little bit of, you know, this 3D to a certain extent, right? It's a nice, beautiful logo. I don't know what these corporations are obsessed with by this, and maybe it's to save weight when they print it on the car, but I can't see how that's going to make any difference. This is the new Mercedes logo, and I think everything is worse. The AMG part is the same. The Petronas parts, you know, I think the old font was probably better. I will say from, let's say, an aesthetic perspective, to see Petronas, it's more bold now, so congratulations, I guess, to them. And then Formula 1 team is also more bold than it used to be. They've also got, next to Formula 1, they've got this like registered trademark or something, which makes it even more ugly. And then, of course, the main talking point was the logo, going from what is a very aesthetic logo to what looks like it's a pre-made template on some sort of graphic design website, right? I mean, there's nothing going on there. I could design that in about it wouldn't even take me 10 minutes. So, yeah, I don't know. Well, these corporations, they just love it, don't they? But going from this on the left, this to me is Mercedes, and maybe it's not a big deal. Nobody's going to care in a couple of weeks, but it was a talking point of today, so I thought I'd mention it because everything somehow over time gets worse. We go from that to this. To me, it's absolutely night and day, whatever. That's what Mercedes have cooked up for the upcoming season. Hopefully their car, for their sake, is better than their logo redesign choice. This is a helmet swap. We see Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez having a good time together before the season gets underway. Cool to see these guys are going to be sharing the grid again. They will not, of course, be sharing the same car. Perez is now driving for Cadillac for the upcoming season. Saw an interesting stat, actually, that the teams with the most experience overall, I think it's first place is Aston Martin with Alonso and Stroll, because Alonso's been around forever, as we know, and Lance Stroll isn't actually, well, he is quite a long way behind, but Stroll's been on the grid a long time at this point, is my point. Ferrari, I think, are seconds, with Hamilton and Leclerc. Pretty similar dynamic in terms of career longevity between those guys and the Aston Martin boys. But in third, in terms of overall, let's say, Grand Prix laps driven dynamics, it's Cadillac with Perez and Bottas. So that's some excitement for the upcoming season. But these are Verstappen and Perez sharing a picture, and Checo even said, thanks for my teammate or friend, or whatever he said anyway. Thanks, my best teammate and friend. Nice to see, really, because yes, time heals all wounds, but as we know, things weren't all sunshine and rainbows between this partnership. We know that Perez had his thoughts on the way that Red Bull were favouring Max. I mean, Checo's been pretty blunt about that, actually, after his tenure has been over. There was, of course, all that talk at Brazil 2022 after Perez may or may not have deliberately crashed in qualifying in Monaco and all of that stuff. Anyway, we know there was drama because Max was told to yield the place. He didn't. He told the team why, and everything continued from there. So they had a decent run as teammates. It wasn't without its controversy on occasion. Nice to see that everything is getting back to plan for the upcoming year. But let's talk about, with Red Bull taking a bit of a back seat in recent days in terms of the talk and the competitiveness, what other teams are in the conversation? Look, Mercedes, McLaren, they are the two favourites, really, for the upcoming season from a constructor's point of view. McLaren are the reigning champions in dominant fashion, but it's Mercedes making the engine. There should be a pretty big advantage this year, you would predict, given the first year. We're talking brand new engine regulations in many respects. Being a manufacturer team, having everything homologated is probably set to be an advantage over where McLaren potentially sit. Now, Aston Martin, they are the only team supplied by Honda, and they even put this out. Everything starts with an idea, and they've got this kind of Aston Martin logo getting drawn up as if Adrian Newey is here on his chalkboard, right? So they clearly, they're talking with some confidence, Aston Martin. There's actually quite a lot of talk today because the race guys, they did a podcast. They talked about a few things, especially on predictions for Aston Martin's season. I think everyone is expecting them to take a step forward. It would be a big surprise, frankly, if they don't. Adrian Newey is at the helm. Look, if they don't, it's probably going to be because their engine isn't good enough rather than because their aero is massively behind the curve. It might not be the best, but it would be a surprise if Newey at the helm has designed a car which isn't at least competitive from an aero perspective. And I'm sure there'll be some tricks and some very interesting ideas in there, and probably some ideas on the Aston Martin that other teams will be protesting. I wouldn't be surprised about that. But the engine side is critical. We know the fuel is a critical component as well. Aramco are designing their e-fuels. We've talked over the last few days about Shell, about Ferrari, where they could have a slight advantage on the biofuels that they're using rather than the synthetics that the other teams might mainly be going for. But whatever happens, it would be a surprise if Aramco are significantly behind the curve. They have really been leading the charge in this technology for some time, and they've been supplying it with Formula One's Junior Series to a certain extent already. So they should be in a good spot. The question for many was, okay, is the Honda engine going to be that good? There were some questions on this over the last couple of months. If it is, then they could be in a good position. If it's not, that will probably be their downfall, because look, Honda did a great job in recent years with Red Bull, but that was after a lot of investment and the power units, homologations and freezers came into effect. So they caught up and they did well for recent years, certainly on the energy recovery side. but it's not necessarily guaranteed to continue. It's true that Honda have had some periods, certainly with McLaren, Alonso knows all about that it was not particularly going very well, was it? So, John Noble says, there are very optimistic comments from Honda. So this is the talk, right? That's the big question. There aren't too many questions on the aero, on the fuel, and even on the driver, really. Okay, drivers, there would be some questions, but on Alonso's level this most recent season, look, I think the team principals had Alonso as the 5th best driver of the year. I thought that was a bit optimistic. I think the drivers put him about 7th, which I think was more reasonable. But he was definitely in the conversation, right? And if Alonso has a car which is capable of winning a championship, he'll give it a damn good go. I have no doubt about that. So even these, verging on 45, whatever he is now, I still think he's got what it takes. And it's also worth pointing out the way these cars are going to be driven the upcoming season. There's going to be a lot on the, let's say, intelligence of the driver. A lot of the success in the upcoming year, according to what all the drivers say, is that you've got this massive battery, 350 kilowatts or whatever, that you can deploy, but you can't deploy it all the time. And you've got to manage how you do that around the lap, and using it smartly for attack and defense is going to be even more critical. It's also already been a thing, right? We see quite often currently with the 15%, now it's near enough 50%, but as it's been 15% electrical for the last few years, you'll see quite often drivers that maybe they overuse the battery to defend on one straight when maybe they didn't really need to, and then they're vulnerable next lap because they've mismanaged their battery. Now, that will be even more of a factor this upcoming year, and the drivers that are very smart and on top of that stuff, they will be the best. And if there's any driver who you would expect to be kind of on it when it comes to these tricks of the trade, Fernando Alonso's got to be up there, right? So I think that's the other piece of the puzzle here. But as I say, the main question is on, all right, can they move quick enough? First of all, are their simulator tools good enough? Because that's what Adrian Newey said, that, yeah, I might be the GOAT in terms of a designer, but if our simulator tools don't work, I can't really tell you what's going to work on the track, and we can't do the correlation properly. There are some concerns about that. But also, is the engine going to be good enough full stop from an internal combustion perspective? Now, John Noble now says everything at Aston's moving in the right direction. Honda are talking a strong game. I'm not saying they're going to dominate Australia. It's rare for a team to go from where they were to winning championships. McLaren kind of did it, but it was over a period where the rules, to be fair, didn't really change. But they made big strides year on year on year, which eventually culminated in the championships that they won. But the race, and John Noble seemed very confident, Aston Martin will be taking a step forward next year. And Scott Mitchell-Malm even went on to say that he's going one step further. He thinks Alonso this year is winning a race and potentially could win the title as well. Okay, very aggressive, risky prediction for sure, but a prediction which may be grounded in some degree of reality. So it's interesting to hear those guys speak very highly of what Aston Martin are currently cooking up. Again, there was further talk that even from an engine development perspective, Honda are now seen as the biggest threat. Look, it changes a lot. People talk about the Red Bull engine and all this, but I think Honda were in this kind of grey area. Nobody really knew. A couple of months ago, everyone was saying Mercedes are the best, Ferrari are kind of there or thereabouts, Red Bull a little bit behind and some reliability concerns. Honda, basically everyone 2 months ago was saying we don't really know, we've not heard anything. So Honda were considered to be quite difficult to place in this conversation. Now the talk is it's maybe better than expected. Doesn't mean it's going to be Mercedes level with all this compression trick drama, but it's in the conversation for sure. Now, Ferrari do not want to be outdone. You're talking about optimism. You're talking about gassing it up before the season begins. You can't beat Ferrari in this game, certainly when there's a new era of regulations in effect. That is the talk. So, we talked about the Ferrari engine in recent days, what they're doing. They're using these steel cylinder heads rather than the aluminium the other teams seem to be going for. That's mainly because if they're stronger, they can run the engine harder. Yes, it's heavier, it has other pros and cons, but Maranello, Ferrari believe that is the way to go. But it's not just about the engine, right? There's other components. It is also the battery. There's talk that they're trying to keep it as compact, the engine and the battery, and as small as possible so that they can use these side pods they want to. Another major advantage of being a works team in Formula 1, the chassis guys can say, okay, we really want to design these side pods with outwash as much as possible. Now, we know that the teams, they love trying to send the airflow outside of the car because it means that the air that their wing elements actually interact with is cleaner, and it means that the car behind is dealing with the dirty air. Now, of course, the regulators, they try to prevent outwash, but that's what Mercedes, when they had those beautiful, massive side pods in 2022, that's what they were going for. They really love to have these big side pods, these big high side pods that will outwash a lot of the air as much as is possible. Other teams tend to go down different routes. To be fair, those side pods, they worked in 2022. They just didn't have the development potential of the Red Bull undercut approach. Maybe this time it's going to be different, and if they go down a similar approach with an F175 style side pod, but they will struggle to do that given the compromises required if they don't have everything down to a T internally. And that's when the chassis guys can say, all right, we want to do this. Can you guys make the engine and everything to align for that? And that's not something that non-works teams have the ability to do. So Ferrari are not only confident that the engine is going to be good, they're confident of the implications, the competence will remain to be seen, but they think we've got to take some risk, otherwise we're not going to win. Other teams are going to be taking some risk. Look, with risk comes reward, with risk also becomes the potential for disaster. What we find out will be very critical in terms of the future of Fred Vasseur, Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, etc. But yeah, further talk about the outwash intention of their side pods that they're trying to design a car around, and it's a talking point that other teams aren't really in the conversation of right now. So Ferrari have taken this bold step. Shell are designing their lubrication for the engine, and also the fuel, which may or may not be better than the rivals. But again, it's about time, right? It's January. It's about time we start to hear these stories about Ferrari being in a good position for the upcoming season. But look, not everyone can be in a good position. And at the end of the day, F1 is a relative game. Ferrari might be in a good position, but what if Mercedes are better? What if Aston Martin, McLaren are simply better? Then you're not going to win the championship anyway, unless, of course, you develop rapidly, which will be probably the deciding factor of this season, is how well teams develop rather than necessarily how well they start. It's a long season after all, longer than it was, let's say, back in 2014 when Mercedes come out the gate and dominate. Speaking of Mercedes, though, they are still considered to be the bookies' favourites. James Vowell says, look, not to say that the other power units are going to be bad, the other teams are going to be weak, but if Brackley is very good at one thing, it is when we have a change of regulation. That is what we have going into this upcoming year. So very much enjoyed your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hope you've had a good 2026 so far. Wishing you nothing but the best for this whole year, for your family, for yourself, and for everyone you care about. And yeah, let's make it a great one. Hope the season's good as well. So thanks for watching as always. Take care, and I'll see you next time.